St. Gabriel's General Hospital was more than just a building. It was a decaying entity, exhaling labored breaths through rusted ventilation shafts. Its reputation was not found in glossy brochures or spoken of during high society charity galas. Instead, it lived in the fragmented whispers of nurses during hurried cigarette breaks, and in the haunted glances exchanged at the nursing station long after the clock struck midnight. It was an old hospital, too old, built decades before modern architecture cared for the concepts of light or human comfort. Its corridors were suffocatingly long and narrow. The walls, once white, had turned a sickly, jaundiced yellow, the color of time and neglect. Even at high noon, certain wings remained shrouded in a permanent twilight, as if the sunlight itself hesitated before crossing the threshold. Daniel Wright began his residency there on a rain-drenched Monday in early November. He was young, ambitious, and freshly graduated with honors. Daniel carried the fragile confidence of a man who believed the world could be mapped out in textbooks. He believed in protocols, clinical diagnoses, and the absolute authority of science. In his world, every effect had a documented cause, and every mystery could be unraveled under a microscope. But St. Gabriel's did not operate by the laws of logic or medicine. On his first week, Daniel was assigned night duty in Wing C. When the head nurse handed him the schedule, she paused. Her eyes flickered over his name, lingering on the words Wing C with a visible, heavy hesitation. "Wing C?" Daniel asked casually, trying to mask his rookie nerves. "Isn't that the old long-term care ward?" The supervisor nodded slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she straightened a stack of files. "It is. It's mostly inactive now. You'll be fine," she replied, though she pointedly avoided his gaze. After a long, unsettling silence, she added, "There is only one patient left." Win C was quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a library, but the heavy, expectant silence of a tomb. It lacked the constant rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, the frantic scuffle of orderlies, and the echoing voices calling for doctors. There was only the low-frequency hum of dying fluorescent lights and the dry, skeletal tapping of rain against cracked window panes. Room 317 sat at the very end of the hallway, where the light was dimmest. The door stood slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of pale, sickly light to spill onto the linoleum floor. Inside sat an elderly man. He was thin to the point of being skeletal, his skin appearing like translucent parchment stretched over bone. His posture was unnaturally rigid. He sat bolt upright on the bed, hands resting neatly on his knees, eyes locked onto the blank wall opposite him. Daniel picked up the chart hanging at the foot of the bed. Name, Michael Harris. Diagnosis, chronic insomnia, unspecified neurological disorder, resistant to all sedatives. Daniel noticed the anomaly immediately. Michael's eyes were wide open, staring. He didn't blink, not once. "Good evening, Mr. Harris," Daniel said, his voice soft and professional. "I'm Dr. Wright. I'll be on night duty." Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Michael turned his head. His movement was mechanical, like a rusted machine forced into motion. "You're new," the man said, His voice was calm, but it carried a profound, soul-deep exhaustion, the voice of someone who had been awake for so long that his spirit had begun to fray at the edges. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied. Michael offered a weak, knowing smile. "Then you don't know it yet." "Know what?" Michael didn't answer. He turned back to the wall, resuming his silent vigil against the void. The first few nights passed with a deceptive monotony. Daniel reviewed charts, filled out paperwork, and consumed far too much coffee to ward off the creeping lethargy of the ward. Wing C remained still. It was almost peaceful, but it was the peace of a predator holding its breath. Then came the fourth night. At exactly 3:07 a.m., Daniel heard the call bell. It was a single chime, long, hollow, and echoing. He checked the monitor at the station. No signal. No room number flashed. A moment later, the sound came again, clearer this time. Daniel stood up, grabbed his flashlight, and walked down the darkened corridor. Light was spilling from room 317. Michael Harris was standing by the window, staring into the rain-soaked blackness of the night. "Did you ring the bell?" Daniel asked, without turning. He shook his head without turning. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. "Hear what?" "The carts, the footsteps. They start their rounds after 3. Daniel strained his ears. Nothing, only the oppressive silence of the hospital. Michael turned toward him, his eyes trembling with a primal terror. "They come to check. They always do." "Who?" Daniel asked, a cold shiver racing down his spine. Michael stepped closer, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "The night staff that don't have names." The encounter left Daniel restless. The next night, curiosity overrode his professional boundaries. He slipped into the hospital's archive room, a cavernous basement filled with dusty filing cabinets that no one had bothered to digitize. Michael Harris's file was thicker than expected. Admission date, 17 years ago. Original department, ICU. Cause, severe trauma from a vehicular accident. Daniel frowned. The records from that period were incomplete. Pages had been ripped out. Others were heavily redacted with thick black ink. One brief report caught his eye. Patient regained consciousness briefly at approximately 3:12 a.m., exhibited extreme distress, claimed awareness of the entire resuscitation process while clinically dead. Daniel's chest tightened. Another handwritten note followed in shaky script. Patient insists sleep equals return. Return where? The final page bore a grim red stamp. Transferred to long-term care, Wing C. Michael never lay down. He never closed his eyes. Daniel began to notice the deepening shadows beneath the man's eyes, a darkness that seemed to be spreading like a bruise. His hands shook with an uncontrollable tremor. "You need rest, Daniel," said one night. "Your body cannot sustain this." Michael let out a dry, hacking laugh. "I already died once, doctor. I don't want to go back there." Daniel froze. "What do you mean?" Michael leaned in, his breath smelling of dust and age. "I remember the ceiling lights in the ER. I remember the metal tray. Someone dropped a surgical tool. Clang. And then I heard my own heart stop." Daniel wanted to argue. He wanted to use his medical training to explain away the trauma, the hallucinations, the false memories of a dying brain. But something in Michael's voice, a raw, terrifying sincerity, stopped him cold. That night, after 3 a.m., Daniel heard it too, a faint, rhythmic rolling sound, the sound of rubber wheels on linoleum tiles, schlick, schlick, schlick. By the 6th night, Daniel was unraveling. Sleep deprivation began to warp his reality. Every night after 3, the sounds in Wing C grew louder, more distinct. Soft, hurried footsteps, murmuring voices just beyond the threshold of hearing, and the slow, heavy roll of something being transported. Each time he lunged into the hallway to investigate, it was empty. The corridor remained cold and indifferent under the flickering lights. Michael watched him with pity. "Here, they're noticing you now," he said. "Who are they?" Daniel snapped, his nerves frayed to the breaking point. "The ones who never went home," Michael replied softly. "The night shift that never ended." On the 7th night, the impossible happened. Daniel logged into the system to check the following week's rotation. At the top of the patient list, a new file appeared. Name: Daniel Wright. He let out a nervous laugh, assuming a colleague was playing a cruel prank. But when he clicked the file, the air left his lungs. Diagnosis: post-traumatic dissociative disorder, chronic insomnia, delusions of being hospital staff. Admission date: 17 years ago. Daniel's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the mouse. A note at the bottom read, "Patient believes he survived." Suddenly, the memories he trusted began to shatter. A flood of sensory data overwhelmed him. The smell of wet asphalt, the screech of twisting metal, the blinding glare of headlights, and a distant voice calling his name, fading into the dark. Was he a resident, or was he the one on the stretcher 17 years ago? Daniel ran to room 317, desperate for Michael to tell him it was a lie. But when he threw the door open, the room was vacant. The bed was bare, covered in a layer of dust so thick it looked like gray snow. No Michael Harris, no medical charts, only the biting chill of a long, abandoned space. A middle-aged nurse approached him, her eyes filled with a terrifying sort of concern. "Dr. Wright, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "The patient," Daniel gasped. "Where is Michael Harris? He was just here." The nurse looked at him with a mixture of confusion and pity. "Doctor, there are no patients in this wing. This ward has been closed for years. The last patient here passed away 17 years ago." Daniel stood frozen. He turned his head toward the wall behind the rusted bed frame. There, scratched faintly into the peeling paint, were 5 words: "Do not sleep on duty." At exactly 3:12 a.m., the sound returned. This time it wasn't distant. The heavy sound of a gurney rolling stopped right outside the door of room 317. The sound of multiple footsteps approached. Daniel sat motionless. He didn't breathe. The world around him was shifting. The jaundiced walls were turning a sterile, blinding white. A voice whispered directly into his ear, cold as the grave. "You're new, aren't you?" Daniel did not turn around. He didn't have to. He looked down at his own hands. They were becoming pale, translucent, fading into the mist of the room. On the computer screen at the station, the Wing C schedule updated automatically. His name was there, locked into a shift that would never see the sun rise.